Good evening, everybody. Firstly, this is the obligatory reminder to please silence your cell phones, which is something I always forget to do. Secondly, I'm at that tender age where I can't quite kind of get the distance between my eyes and the notes, and the podium isn't quite at the right height, so I'm going to hold my notes here. Okay. Thirdly, hi, good evening. I'm Bill Garrity. I'm the university librarian and vice provost. I'd like to welcome you to tonight's Savor program, which the UC Davis Library is proud to present in partnership with the Robert Mondavi Institute for Wine and Food Science. This Savor lecture series, is designed to engage the community on topics where UC Davis is providing new insights through its research on food and beverages. Tonight, we will explore one of the most cutting-edge topics in food research, the possibilities and limitation of using AI in the development of new food products, and the social and ethical implications of doing so. So please note that this evening's program is being recorded, and we'll have time at the end for questions, and typically Ned and I will move the mic around the room and try and do a decent job of representing that everybody gets to ask their questions, but we will probably not accomplish that, so please be patient. Okay. First, before we begin, we should take a moment to acknowledge the land on which we are gathered. For thousands of years, this land has been the home of the Putwin people. Today, there are 3 federally recognized Putwin tribes: the Cachel-Behe Dan Wintun Indians of the Calusa Indian Community, the Quetzal-Dehe Wintun Nation, and the Yoka-Dehe Wintun Nation. The Putwin people have remained committed to the stewardship of this land over many centuries. It has been cherished and protected as the elders have instructed the young through the generations. We are honored and grateful to be here tonight on their ancestral lands. So let's turn our attention now to the topic of tonight's program, which is one I'm particularly excited about. In my role, my colleagues and I think a lot about AI and how it is reshaping how people share knowledge, which fundamentally is the business of libraries. I also serve on the campus AI Council, which is developing principles to guide the university's own management and use of AI across all of our missions in teaching, research, clinical care, and administration. So I'm going to be super interested to hear about what our panelists say this evening about how AI is being integrated into food and sensory science, one of UC Davis's signature research strengths. Artificial intelligence is fundamentally in part about the development of computer systems and algorithms that can simulate human behavior or carry out tasks that typically require human intervention. And what is more human in all its senses than our palates? Tonight's panel will help expand our thinking about how AI can be used in the food sector and what machine learning, another name for AI, means when the data set is the human palate. Finally, before we dive in, I'm pleased to share that tonight's Savor program also serves as a prelude to the Thinking Food Colloquium, which the UC Davis Library is proud to support as well. Thinking Food is a year-long initiative that has drawn connections among historical, current, and future perspectives about the systematic roots of food inequity, and it will be hosting its final 2-day colloquium here tomorrow and Saturday. Now it's my pleasure to introduce my partner, good colleague, and our friend and co-host for this Savor series, and our moderator for tonight's event, Ned Spang, Associate Professor of Food Science and Technology, and the luckiest man in the world as he is the director of this institute. So thank you, Ned.
Thanks, Bill. I appreciate it. Well, we're here to talk tonight about the fact that we're in a transformative moment in our food system. We have artificial intelligence operating across our food system already in many ways, from farm to fork. We're looking at how to better utilize weather data, how to better utilize understanding of how plants use nutrients on the farm. We're looking at how we order food from the retail space and how we move it around across the world using AI to help us make those transfers more efficient. And we're also thinking about all the way to the consumer, how does their genetic disposition, all the potential food allergies, how does that align up with personal nutrition, thinking about how we can design specific food products for specific people. So there's AI and food is already with us, and so I'm delighted tonight to take a deeper dive into food product development, thinking about new food products. How do we go from tracking social trends to thinking about new and emerging flavors and how AI can help us do that in a more efficient way? But also, what are some of the implications if we go down this road? How do we think about this as both an opportunity and some potential challenges that might come with it? So I'm delighted to have my panelists with me tonight to talk about this really topical and interesting issue tonight. I have Justin Shimek, who is the chairman and CEO of Matson, an independent food innovation firm that develops food and beverage products for clients ranging from Fortune 500 companies to startups. He's also on the Food Science and Technology Leadership Board, so I want to give you a shout out for that. Julien Delarue, my colleague in Food Science and Technology, associate professor. His research focuses on methods for measuring sensory perception and taste and how to use that data in food design. And finally, we have Carrie Alexander, is a postdoctoral scholar at the Artificial Institute for Next Generation Food Systems and a lecturer in Science and Technology Studies at UC Davis. Her research focuses on the intersection of food systems and AI technologies, policy, governance, and law. So pretty straightforward stuff. So with that, we're gonna have each of our speakers talk for a moment, 5 or 10 minutes to sort of introduce their perspective on this topic, and then we'll sit down and have a discussion. So Justin, go ahead and lead the way.
First.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you. And thanks for having me. It's great to be back at UC Davis. I did get my PhD here in food science. When was that? 2002. So it's been a little while, but as Ned mentioned, I do get back periodically for the Food Science and Technology Leadership Board. But this is a topic that's of great interest to us as a company, and I think as an industry, and clearly as a world, just because AI technology is one of these technologies that is a general use technology that's going to really cut across every single facet of our lives. And so what I'm here to do is tell you a little bit about how we are implementing that in food and beverage. But before that, because one of the things we say at Matson is respect the hot food, or in this case, respect the cold drinks. I want to orient you to what's in front of you and invite you to have a taste while I'm talking. This is not designed to be a descriptive sensory experience. I'll leave that to my colleague. This is more of, think about it as a somewhat structured cocktail hour. And so we actually, just last week, were at the National Restaurant Association show. We were in Chicago. We were demoing some of our AI tools that we've been developing for the restaurant and food service industries. We put on an event. And so we were creating a lot of different small bites and cocktails. And one of the things that we did was we actually created this calamansi and tamarind margarita with a tahini rim. And the reason we put this specific cocktail together using some of our AI chefs that we'll talk about is because it was fusing together both Southeast Asian flavors and Latin flavors, because we were actually offering some of both. And tamarind, for those of you familiar, actually shows up in both places. The citrus, the fresh citrus, and the heat and the margarita format seemed to work. So what we created was both alcoholic and non-alcoholic versions, which you can try both or either or neither. It's up to you. But I just wanted to orient you to the mat, because under your glass, it'll say alcoholic version or non-alcoholic version. So again, just be mindful of that. The QR code that's on the mat, you can scan for the recipe itself if you want to see what's in it. Also, there's information on some of the other recipes we created for that event. So again, feel free to drink up as we're going through this. No need to hold off. And the kumquat garnish is fully edible. So again, something that was new to me. Anyways, just who are we? So I'm Justin Shimek. The company that I represent is Matson. It's not a company I founded. Actually, we've been in business for almost 50 years, operating here in the Bay Area in Northern California. Pete Matson, our founder, was actually a longtime supporter of UC Davis. And so I'm pleased to continue in his legacy. We're an employee-owned company. There's 65 of us. Everyone, if you came to our offices that you would meet, it was not just an employee, but an owner. So Pete actually formed the ESOP as he managed himself out of the business. And of that, we're not all food scientists like me. We have strategists, we have scale-up specialists, we have marketers, we have insights folks. So we're a really multi-phasic innovation team. something that's common across our team is we're all passionate about food and wanting to make an impact, and an impact specifically for our clients, because we're in the service business. We like to say that we are in 100% share of stomach. So as Ned mentioned, we've been creating products for a long time. We've launched several thousand SKUs, hundreds of product lines. And it could be for big companies, startups, food service, CPG, every temperature state, every meal state, fun, functional. So if it's a food or a beverage, it's something that we've often been involved with, if not those products specifically in that category. And we work across the whole innovation continuum. So products just don't fall out of the ether from an idea to the supermarket shelf. They take a process. It's not always this linear. It's never this linear, in fact. But we can engage with our clients as early as the new product strategy phase, talking to consumers early on, getting insights, hosting ideations where we can come up with lots of ideas, reducing them to practice as concepts, fully developing them, finding co-packers to commercialize them. So we work really broadly across this whole process. And really importantly tonight, we actually believe that AI has a role at every single stage in the food and beverage innovation process. And we'll talk a little bit about some specific instances of that. And we're continuing to develop. We've been really on our AI journey, really probably for the last 5 years, and publicly for 2. Another important concept is, our company is really made up of a lot of deep subject matter experts. And so, for us, everything starts with real intelligence, or the RI. And I think it's going to be really important to my point here, is that AI really isn't anything without the RI. So if you take one thing away from my talk tonight, it's this specific slide, is that from our perspective, it's all about the artful combination of the real intelligence with the artificial intelligence. So if you've had your own personal experiences with ChatGPT or Google Gemini, you'll know that you have to sit there at the keyboard and provide a prompt. We've been spending a lot of time over the last couple of years really figuring out how we build the best prompts, but also how we tune the models and actually figure out how to get the most out of AI so we can have this hyper-collaborative relationship. We don't look to AI as giving us the answer. We look at AI as a thought partner, as a seat at the table, like you might think about a trusted colleague, right? So you don't take everything as gospel, but you actually take it as a thought partner and another entity that can amplify your own thinking. We love to say that generative AI, which is the flavor of AI that we're practicing, really excels at food and beverage. We're actually lucky in a way because so much of the publicly available information that's been swept up into these large language models like ChatGPT or Google Gemini has been based on publicly available information. And so much of it is actually oriented to food and beverage. Arguably, food and beverage is actually the #1 genre of information that's in these language models. Ned and I are both part of the Google Food Lab. And so, some of this is working with our friends there. But, we've learned that of all the blogs that have been written and continue to be written, 66%, like 2/3 of them, are actually directly food related or indirectly food related. So 43% of blogs are food and beverage, very specifically oriented. Lifestyle, travel, others that are indirectly are also food related. So just think about that as an example. That's only one piece of the training material that's been used. But if you extend that to social media, endless websites, scientific papers, so much of the information out there is food and beverage. And just as a proof point, this is not AI, this is just Google, which hopefully you're all familiar with. But if you've ever paid attention, when you do a search, you can sometimes see the number of indexed pages that Google has. So if you're interested in this eating pattern called intermittent fasting, it's that, hey, I only eat in an 8-hour window a day. What you'd see is if you just did a simple Google search, there's 234 million indexed pages by Google. You might read the first few pages, but obviously there's a lot more information out there. If you're interested in a new cuisine like butter chicken, you'd actually see that there's 1.12 billion index pages. So again, that's just giving you a few proof points of the types of information that have been swept up into these models. And we like to think about it as a deep field, right? All of this information exists billions of data points, trillions of parameters. But really, the artful use of AI, and what's great about generative AI is it's how it organizes this information and actually allows you to access it. Because Google is great, but you're only going to read the top few hits. You're not going to go deeper. AI allows you, through your prompt and personas and other things, to actually pull all this information together in something that's logical. If we were doing an innovation project historically, and what we still do is we start out with what we know, we do some secondary research, maybe we'll do some proprietary research, but we think that actually that set of circles of the legacy approach to innovation is incredibly small relative to the amount of information that exists out there. And again, this is so oriented towards consumer food experiences and information. I'm going to be talking a bit about personas, and we use AI personas as a lens. So if you're going to look out into this deep field, think about it like a telescope where there's billions of stars, and you want to connect the dots in a meaningful way. Well, what you can look through a lens is the lens of a consumer persona, or a persona that you can build. Sometimes they're consumers because we'll actually want to get an understanding of kind of emerging behaviors. We'll build specific consumer behavior personas that allow us to basically have almost a dialogue and understand those behaviors. We can also build them, though, for retail buyers. If we're going to sell a product into a certain retailer, maybe we want to get a perspective on what's happening in a certain category in the grocery store. Chefs I'll talk a lot about, but also technical experts. So again, AI personas are a way to get a lens into that deep field of information. And what's really cool about AI is it's not just words. For those of you that are familiar with, again, ChatGPT, that's your primary, kind of with the keyboard. But now they're going so much multimodal. Images as prompts, images as responses. Everything on this page is AI generated. So if you're doing an exploration of food, for anybody who's been in an ideation where you're coming up with ideas, the old way was with a Post-it note and a Sharpie, and you sketched out your idea and you put them up on the wall. Now, during an ideation, you can actually bring your ideas out of your mind's eye into, again, not quite food yet, but a picture that starts to tell you, hey, am I on the right track? And then not only can you get food on a plate or beverages in a glass, but you can actually start to build packaged products, and you can start to actually build brands and think about positioning. And you can sometimes do this in the course of a day. And when you're leaving now the ideation, you can have fully built concepts. To that point, this is just an example of a product that one of our clients is launching that was built with some of our AI tools. Actually, the Sweet and Snacks Expo just happened also 2 weeks ago. This is Snack Club, a ramen flavored snack mix that we created for them, won one of their awards. And the uniqueness here was this custom ramen piece, noodle piece that we actually, once we conceptualized it, we went out and formulated it, and it's just a delicious product. It's not on the market yet, so I couldn't bring it here tonight, hence the cocktails. But I wanted to let you know that it is happening. Like Ned said, it's literally getting baked. AI is getting baked into products that we're experiencing. I mentioned personas and chef personas, and so for the event that we talked about at the National Restaurant Association show, we used one of our newest models that we call Chef Insights AI, where we've built a model that has 40 chef personas with deep, deep, deep resumes that cut across culinary traditions. Some are research chefs, some are QSR, quick serve, fast food operators, some are high cuisine. And we actually collaborated with them to come up with the menu. And we basically built this tool for everyone in the food industry to use. If you're a chef, hey, now you have some chef collaborators that you can talk to. If you're not a chef and you need some culinary information and you're a food scientist, well, that's great too, because now you have actually chefs that you can relate to. The way that this model is built, and I'm just going to briefly introduce you to our executive chef, Chef Morgan. It was designed in such a way that Chef Morgan is the lead chef. He can call on all the other chefs, pull together a small team, ideate with you, and then come up with ideas. And so that's how we got to the cocktail. So I'm just actually, again, AI is multimodal. It's not just, again, on the keyboard. It's in your pockets. So I'll just do a quick introduction. Hey, chef, are you there? It's Justin. Oops. Oh, hey, chef. Sorry, the volume was turned down. Can you actually let me tee up what we're doing here. So I'm at an event at UC Davis called Savor. It's a lecture. I'm here with about 60 or 70 people, and we're just talking about food and beverage AI. Can you just briefly introduce yourself, mention what Chef Insights is, and then just quickly say how we collaborate with our clients?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. I'm Chef Morgan. With over 35 cutting-edge food innovation, I lead Chef Insights AI. This AI blends the expertise of various culinary professionals to help develop innovative food and beverage products. We collaborate with clients by offering tailored insights, whether it's trend analysis, menu development, or product innovation, ensuring your creations resonate with today's consumers.
Hey, great, Chef. And, just one quick thing. We put in front of everyone tonight a calamansi and tamarind margarita with a tahini rim that we created for our restaurant show a couple weeks ago. We did that with Chef Ethan Monroe, who's part of the team. I was just thinking, if we had actually gone to the point of bringing a small bite to the party tonight, that would be a good complement for this margarita. What might it be? What would maybe you recommend? Something that would be a great pairing?
That sounds delicious. For a small bite to complement the calamansi and tamarind margarita, I'd recommend something that balances the sweet tart flavors. A citrus-infused ceviche with a touch of heat, maybe topped with avocado and served on a crispy plantain chip, would pair beautifully. The freshness and acidity would really complement the drink.
You know what? I think for a group like this, where if we were only bringing one item, I'd worry about shellfish allergies. If we were going to make it more of a plant-based item, but still be a good complement, what might you recommend?
Great point. For a plant-based option, I'd suggest a mango and avocado salsa with a hint of jalapeno and cilantro served on mini tostadas or endive leaves. The sweetness of mango, creaminess of avocado, and a little spice would harmonize nicely with the margarita.
Okay. Well, hey, you know what? We're going to have to let you go. I will invite anyone after to come up. You can interact with Chef Morgan, ask him your own questions. But say goodbye, and I'm going to turn it over to the next presenter.
Thank you all. It's been a pleasure. Feel free to reach out anytime. Enjoy the rest of your event.
So, as I said, personas are just one lens in, but we're finding that the more that we can make our AI usable and easy to collaborate with, we'll get more out of it. And so, with that, I'll just say thank you and to the next.
Hi. So I'm Julien Delarue, and I'm a sensory and consumer scientist. So part of my research, or the goal of my research actually, is to understand or try to understand what people perceive, how we perceive our food, and why people like what they like. I think Chef Morgan is here, right?
Sorry. He wanted to be on the panel, but...
So really our goal is to understand what people like and really not just what they like, but why they like what they like and what they eat, we are extensive users of AI, specifically machine learning. And with the progress of AI, there's a lot of hope about what we can do and how much we can understand of sensory perception and liking. So, but here I would just like to present you a few slides to give you an idea, some background about the challenges that we are facing when we are investigating perception and liking and behavior. So the first thing is that when we talk about food and we talk about the flavor and the taste and the texture of the food, it's something that is not only in the food. It's actually the result of an interaction between the food and the person that eats the food, just like the triangles on this slide. If you look carefully at this slide, there's no triangle, right? But you have this perception that the triangles are there. The same thing goes with flavors. The flavors, there are some chemical compounds in the food, but until someone tastes them and the compounds reach the epithelium of your nose, of your olfactory epithelium, and that information, that signal is transformed into neuronal information and treated by your brains, then it becomes actually a flavor. Not until that. So this is very important because that interaction, so the sensory perception is the result of an interaction. And people are all different. So for each person, the result of the interaction is different. And usually we're not aware of that. So just to give you an example of the complexity of flavor perception, here are two molecules, two compounds. They look very much the same, don't they? Even if you're not a chemist, you will, you know. And if you're a chemist, maybe you will spot one tiny difference. It's just right here. And it's because there's a very small difference in terms of spatial conformation of this molecule. And because of that, these two compounds, they're both ionon or ionon. The one on the left is beta ionon, and it smells like violet. And the one on the right, which is very similar in terms of chemistry, smells like rose. How can you predict that? Well, we cannot. With regular models, people who work on predictive modeling for chemistry and predictive modeling of odor perception, they're not very successful at that. Hopefully, AI can help, and there's been a lot of progress with that. The problem is, of course, we're all different. So when we look at, for example, the sensitivity to these compounds, we see huge variation. So this is the distribution of odor detection thresholds. So we have different, the same compound diluted at different steps, and we ask people at which concentration they detect the compound. And we see there's a large spread here. So if we go from the least diluted to the most diluted, we can see that there's a huge range of concentration. It goes from 150 parts per billion to 0.6 parts per billion. Okay. So it means that there are people here on the right-hand side that detect this compound as very, very low concentrations. So they're basically 400 times more sensitive than other people that are on the left-hand side on the plot. Okay, so this is the reality of olfactory perception. And that's the best case scenario, because for alpha ionon, we have a bimodal distribution. And that's because of our genes, because we are not equipped with the same receptors. And in this case, the range of concentration is even larger. So the difference between the most sensitive people and the least sensitive people is 500,000 times in terms of sensitivity. And again, with a molecule that is almost the same. Another example, if we talk about taste, the so-called basic taste. Let's talk about bitterness. We're not equally sensitive to bitterness. Again, because of our genes and the receptors, the bitterness receptors we're equipped with. Some people are sensitive to the bitterness of Brussels sprouts, and that's because they have this bitter receptor here, specifically TAS2R38. And other people that don't have this receptor or that have another variant of this receptor in their taste bud will perceive differently, and maybe they won't perceive the bitterness of Brussels sprouts. But those people may have another receptor, and they would find stevia to be bitter. I'm more like this person. So we're all unique, and just for your information, just for the basic taste, for basic bitterness, there are more than 25 different types of receptors that have been identified so far. And that's variability that no one suspects, because we don't talk so much about our sensory perception, unless it's very, very bitter. So we all have our unique perception of what we taste, of what we are experiencing. But it's not just the food, it's also how we pair the food or the context in which we experience it. So for example, take another compound here, benzaldehyde. Smells like bitter almond. Right? If you pair this compound with green dye, people would tell you, oh, it smells or tastes like pistachios. But if you take the same compound and add a red dye instead of green, then people would tell you, oh, it smells like cherry. And they're both right. It's just the way our brains work. We integrate the signals, the information that comes from all our senses. And we get a lot of information from the context in which we are experiencing the food. So every single food experience, eating or drinking experience, is also unique. So think about trying to understand what's going on and predicting that. Hopefully AI will help us with that, but we're not there yet. And then I would say that eating is not just about food. Of course, as food scientists, so these are a picture, very simplistic scheme of the various determinants of food behavior. And as food scientists, we tend to focus, and even as consumers, we tend to focus on the recipe of the food itself. But a lot of the experience is conditioned by our genes, what we think about the food, the context, the people we're eating or drinking with, the culture that we're part of, or any expectations that we may have about the food. And that's probably the most challenging part, because that's where we have the largest diversity and variability among people. So the task is immense, and hopefully AI can help us with that. I think that's it for me for now. A lot of food for thought.
Oh, hello. Can you all hear me? I'm told I'm quiet, so hopefully everyone can hear me. Well, thank you. This was really interesting to listen to these talks, and it's hard to follow up on such fascinating and exciting information. I will say, as I was listening to Justin's talk, I was thinking about my former life as a graphic designer and marketer. I ran my own business in marketing and ran into ethical issues while I did that back in the early 2000s, and that's what led me to come to UC Davis and do my PhD in history. I'm a cultural historian, but I've also used quantitative methods, and I migrated into science and technology studies and working on AI. And I look at broad cultural trends. So I think both from a marketing standpoint as well as in my work as a scholar, I have always tried to keep my finger on the pulse of culture and trends that are happening in the society around us. The work I've done with APHIS allowed me to interview a lot of food system stakeholders, farmers, industry stakeholders, food producers. I've also conducted surveys through the California Farm Bureau, and other groups, and tried to listen to what people are saying about their thoughts on AI technologies, the challenges that they're running into in their day-to-day lives, and whether they think AI can help them with that. In the process, I have, I guess, identified a couple of things I'm going to call myths. I'm going to use that term kind of carefully tonight. I don't know that you can really fully say that something is a myth if it implies that it might not be true. My research indicates that maybe there are some ideas that are popular about AI, especially in the food system, that may not be true, but more research needs to be done. So I'm going to introduce the myths, and I'm going to try to kind of refocus and reframe the conversation that we have about AI to encompass some of these other findings that I've learned from my own research. So myth number one, when I first started my work with APHIS 4 years ago, I heard this a lot from AI researchers and from others that were saying, you know, farmers, food producers, companies, they don't really want to use AI, they don't trust it. And maybe a related point would be, do you trust AI, generative AI, other forms of AI, to do things for you? I ask my students this in our classes. What do you trust AI to do? That is a very big conversation that's happening around AI technologies now. And there's this assumption that if we just make AI technologies better, maybe more people will trust them and then they'll feel more comfortable adopting. So that was a very common assumption or experience that I was hearing about in my initial interviews that I conducted in the beginning of my time with APHIS. But as I went out and I spoke with more farmers and I conducted surveys and more interviews, I found that actually many of them are very willing to adopt AI. They think that it does work in many cases. There are other kinds of reasons that they may not use it. It might be that it's not built for the kinds of work that they need to do, whether that be in the fields or in a factory or the type of produce they're growing. It could be that there are legal issues and liability issues. This is a huge problem for a lot of companies now. They are being advised by their legal teams not to adopt the technology because it introduces legal uncertainties into their business, and they don't know what those costs will be. So it doesn't necessarily hold true that just making the technologies better and more trustworthy will mean that everyone adopts. Actually, what really needs to happen is, as a society, on many levels, from legal, governance issues, cultural, social issues, we would have to work together to develop frameworks that would allow us to manage these technologies and integrate them into our lives. And we may not be there yet in all of the ways that we might need to be. So that is one point that I'll put out there. I'll move to the, this is an example we had. We discovered that companies were hesitant to adopt predictive technologies that might reveal more about their operations, and would be then subject to more legal costs, either for mitigating harms, or if they didn't mitigate, then for they would be held more liable, and then the AI might provide proof that they actually knew but chose not to mitigate. So again, these are big uncertainties. The regulation we usually hear about for AI is how do we prevent AI from causing harm? We don't often think about AI being capable of doing something and even preventing harm, but companies and individuals being hesitant to use it because they aren't sure of the cost that will come to their businesses. So these are very on-the-ground kinds of concerns that people have voiced. Another myth is that when we're working with the technologies in the food system, that it's very much about improving the technology, developing it, implementing it. But in my experience also, it's true, we do need to work on the technologies, but we often forget about the many people that are involved. There are people that are workers, workers in the field, workers in offices, workers in factories that would potentially either be working alongside these AI technologies or potentially not hired because AI technologies can perhaps do these jobs faster, more efficiently, better, or lower cost. It seems to me from all of the research I've done that the higher the standards we have for how we want to treat human employees, the more we want to take care of them, provide insurance, better wages, health care, et cetera, better conditions, the more expensive that becomes. And the more likely companies will turn to technologies to find ways of conducting their work at a lower cost. I don't want to encourage a sort of finger pointing, and it's very easy to do that. We have to remember business is part of our culture as well. Business is part of our society. This is how we have built the society we have, and we have to address these problems together. But it is important to remember that sometimes it pushes against, adopting the technologies pushes against what we want to do to take care of humans. There are many humans involved, many people involved in adopting technologies. I really liked Julien's points about the uniqueness of each individual, and I think that extends to communities. It extends to whole cultures that are used to certain food practices. Food is very personal. It is something that can be rooted in our identities. It is something we often hold on to, especially in times of uncertainty, like perhaps what we're facing now. So when we introduce new technologies into these very deeply personal experiences with food and our cultural identities and our communities, it is good to find out what people are thinking about that. It is good to ask and do more research around that. So this is another example I'll share is in my interviews, I was told that if we don't get ahead of this and really start building better communication around the use of these technologies in the food system, that we might encounter an experience like has happened with the GM food trends, where there were many controversies that rose up around that. It's been fiercely debated. There are people who are very in favor, people who are very opposed. And one thing that AI researchers were telling me is that they wanted to see better messaging around these topics early on before another such controversy arose around the use of AI. So again, I guess the key takeaways, we want to think about the current law and uncertainty trapping companies in old technologies. If that's true, then how can people across the food system, government, AI developers, and the public cooperate to make law and policy that allows companies to make use of AI for everyone's benefit? That's a very important question. It's not just about making regulation that might block AI or in some way prevent AI from developing, but how will it develop in a way that companies feel comfortable adopting it, or that individuals feel comfortable adopting it? How can you know that it will work to your benefit? And then also, I do think we need more research around various people's points of view and perspectives. The people in the system need to be seen. We need to interview more farmers and more food producers. We need to speak more with the public. We need to talk with consumers. We need to really listen and understand what different concerns people have, what their questions are, and be addressing these. And I believe that that is what should shape marketing, it should shape regulation, it should shape the public discourse and the conversations we have around the technologies. I think that's all I had. So, thank you. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you all. That was fantastic. I mean, three very different perspectives, coming at this issue or opportunity from different perspectives. I can't help but thinking, like, if we're starting to pull all this data together that we haven't pulled together before, billions and billions of data points, and we talked a little bit about, the independent and unique characteristics we have as consumers, the number of products we have out there. Is there some risk of this great homogenization where the food all starts to taste the same because we kept measuring that's what people liked, and we start to lose a little bit of the heterogeneity in our food system? So I'm just wondering, I kind of wanted to throw that out there. If we're synthesizing all this data, are we synthesizing out the different kind of unique traits of food around the world? The follow-up question, which is the really easy one, is then what does that mean for food sovereignty and cultural components of food? I mean, there's some real challenges in there. I was kidding that that's easy.
Who wants to start?
Well, I guess to answer from my perspective, I mean, I was thinking about this cocktail, and so by design, we were trying to fuse culinary traditions and create something that actually didn't exist before. That was kind of the mission that we gave it. We said, hey, we want to actually say flavors of Southeast Asia and flavors of Latin America, but that are in harmony together, that somehow make sense together. So let's generate some ideas. And that's, I mean, you can tell us whether we're successful or not. But that was the concept. And then I think it was even interesting as I was making these cocktails tonight with Lainey and Mabel, who were the expert helpers. The glasses were actually provided by you guys. I brought these cheap plastic tumblers. But the way that the tahini kind of adhered to the glass was different. And, the tahini is the spicy component. And as we all tasted it together, we kind of realized, oh, maybe we should apply a little bit less because it's sticking to this glass really well, and maybe we put too much on. And again, when I think about sensory characteristics, I mean, I grew up in Minnesota, and the taste buds around heat at least of my family in Minnesota, I think about a lot when we're developing new food products because their tolerance for that is a little bit different than maybe we have out here. So I don't know. I mean, from my perspective, I think it can still get us to this. I don't know if the risk is homogenization. I think maybe there's a way that we can more quickly sample new spaces and find things that we like, but at the same time realize that AI right now can't taste the food. And so we're going to have to provide that perspective and maybe call an audible to make sure that it tastes good, even if AI suggested we build the cocktail a certain way.
Yeah, thanks. Did you guys want to add something to this?
Yeah, well, I think that in terms of modeling and how we manage AI systems, to be very broad, is probably at the moment a little bit limiting because in terms of sensory input, we're feeding it with sensory data that are based on very small panels. And usually it's only average results that are taken into account. And I think that there's a risk at the moment that the initial data set that are used to create new food or to give any recommendation are a little bit limited. So my hope is that in the future, we'll change our perspective and expand the data that we're using. So that's a first point. But I'm still very optimistic because I think that maybe there's a risk of homogenization, but also there's a real opportunity for tailored solutions and recommendations. Like I would love to have a Chef Morgan, don't wake up, at home to give me suggestions for wine pairing, or when I'm preparing, I made my mind on a recipe, but then I want to pair that with something else or with a wine or drink. Yeah, that would be super useful. And if that's something that is really personalized, yeah, why not? And it's probably the opposite effect.
That's great.
Well, yes. I mean, I think that it's both. I do think that it's exciting to see the kind of creative aspects of using generative AI in particular. And I think I was just sitting here thinking about perhaps Spotify or other sorts of tools that we might use on a day-to-day basis that we turn to make suggestions, recommendations. I do think that even in that case, that there are some, and this is the problem with statistics, as you pointed out, with averages, is that it's losing those ends, and it usually ends up funneling you toward one set over and over again, or a more of that the average experience would want. So maybe there would be a way to tailor it, although then I think we need more data points, and that usually involves data sharing and privacy, and so we get into those kinds of concerns. I think it's exciting to explore this, but I do think that there could be a risk of losing certain elements of our own creativity if we don't sort of work hard to try to keep both. I think you were talking about the RI plus the AI. Mm-hmm. I think really using these technologies in addition to our own creativity would be very important.
Yeah, that it makes me think of when I was, in grad school doing some environmental modeling. We had this saying, I think it's pretty common, that garbage in, garbage out of the model, right? So if you don't have great data on consumer preferences that's highly granular, that takes into account context and how you're exploring those flavors, your model is not going to really be able to give you the answer of what you're looking for in those situations or for your own preferences. The other one I think that's really interesting for the RI plus AI, it really calls into the importance of our own ability to prompt these tools, right? Like if I say, what should I make for dinner tonight? I'm pretty sure it's going to tell me butter chicken. But if I use some of the prompts you were saying, hey, I want to blend these flavors, I prefer this, and I want to have more protein, you'll get an actually pretty good response usually. That's I think we have to be specific in our requests in order to get a specific response, rather than, I think, again, the butter chicken example works pretty well. I cannot believe that there's 2 billion entries on butter chicken.
Well, I think what's interesting is, like, especially in food and beverage, I think about the grocery store, and you walk up and down the aisles, and any particular food product category, you could think about breakfast cereal. There's lots of different flavor experiences, lots of different SKUs. There's never been one answer. I think as a food product developer, it's the same kind of problems we've always faced. Like, there's going to be different tastes. There's a distribution of people. If you're going to create a product and you want to sell millions of units Well, you have to kind of think about that distribution, and you don't want to shoot for the long tail because there's just not enough consumers. If you're a smaller producer or you're a restaurant, I think you can definitely cater to that. So I think, to me, the food system is really diverse in that way. And I think, in some ways, I think we can still cater to the whole distribution. I think, in my mind, AI just allows us to be smarter, faster in getting to some of the potential answers. There's not one answer. I don't want to eat the same thing every meal, every day. I want to eat something different each day of the week. And, and how do I get to that distribution faster?
Yeah, I think that understanding of the bell curve is really important. As we scale these different pieces, there's always going to be that sort of unique flavor for a unique population that's looking for those flavors. But moving towards the average is definitely something interesting, I think, as we synthesize across all the knowledge that we have that's digital. It's quite interesting. I wanted to follow up, too, on the point Carrie was talking about, is this sort of this other dimension of human engagement with AI. Like, for example, I think we were talking before the event, sort of how we're dealing with students in AI or, your workers in AI. I'm wondering, for example, in your business, are you able to do, have more contracts with the same amount of people because you're using AI now, or you feel like you're getting better results because you're using AI, or both? I'm just curious as to see, practically what has been the outcomes of implementing AI in your business.
I think in our case, I think a lot of businesses, I think it's early days. I mean, I think the promise of AI is there's going to be some levels of efficiency that come just with speed, because you can do things faster than you could before. And, and those people, I think the way I think about it is it allows the human resources to do their highest and best work. Because there's a lot of other work that maybe, we all have to do every day that we would prefer not to. And if we could put that aside and actually do a little more creative, the types of work that's really using our unique human potential. And I kind of think about that in our business. If we can take everybody and elevate them a bit, then yeah, certainly I think we can get more done. But I think, it just opens up other possibilities. I think it also depends on the type of work. Like right now, we're using it a lot for creative, for insights. The food formulation piece, like right now, we still have human beings in the lab building food products, tasting food products. And, and I think it's certainly a help to those formulators, but not in the same way that, maybe if you were a graphic designer or a brand designer, you can do things now that, might have taken you, especially when it was before the Adobe days and it was pencils, wheel back the clock a little bit. I think certainly those industries can move much faster. So it really depends on I think the specific tasks you're doing.
Yeah, that's great. I appreciate you making the distinction, not just between the amount of work you're doing or the quality of the work, but the quality of the work for the employees and how they're spending their day. So that's an important piece. For you guys with your students, I'm wondering, how are you sort of integrating AI, and are you sort of putting it up front and talking about it and integrating it, or trying to create a little distance between it to get the regular curriculum, make sure that that's getting through? What has been your approach?
Well, I must admit, quite recently, but more engaging with AI. First of all, I realized that I had no choice. There might be some of my students in the room, but even for exam, I always went with open book, and I realized that I have to go open AI. But of course, I warn the students that it's at their own risk. But even in the syllabus, in the content of the class, I encourage them to use AI, like for when we have a class on new product development, for example, but also for data analysis, for understanding consumers. Like, you in the industry, people use focus groups a lot, qualitative techniques, interviews, and usually it takes days to analyze those data, have very objective, a report, accurate report of what have been said in the different discussion sessions. Now that's something that you can do real time. And the same goes for any data analysis. So it's almost the opposite. To answer your question, now my students encourage me to use AI more in my research.
Sure. We've been, in my AI and society class, I have my students, I run a lab, and I have them work with AI to test its limits, see what it can do. I'm just thinking of a group that they were working on a script so that they could write a video, which we were developing for the library, in fact. And they wanted to use AI to synthesize their various scripts into something that was a little cleaner. And they came up to me and said, can we do this? Because they're so used to professors telling them no. And I said, absolutely, give it a shot, see what happens. And they came back to me a week later and said it didn't do a very good job. They thought they'd lost too much of the things they had written. And so then I helped edit it with them. We basically went in line edited it. It was more time consuming, but I think they wanted a better product and I wanted to help them get there. So I think that's the approach I tend to take, exploratory, encouraging students to see what it can do for them. I'm also still a graphic designer, so I think that it does speed up work that we do for both the students as well as any sort of work they're working. I have students working on a game. I use a lot of simulations in games because it moves us into a very different problem-solving space and helps us to experiment with different scenarios. And I would say it seems that while it does, again, it makes it faster, perhaps some of the more, the simple tasks we think, but we have to still engage with it heavily. We still have to ask ourselves very tough questions and push ourselves, and that's what I try to do in the classroom.
So working on that critical thinking, making sure it's a two-way street with the AI and not just a question and response and that's it. It should be an iterative process and we do sort of have to be trained in how to use these new tools. It's not, while they're so easy to use them correctly, we actually have to think in a very, very considered way. I have another question that I guess it's to all panelists again, is that with food product development, of course you want to make something delicious and appealing, but we have other goals that we're trying to do with food, right? We're trying to make things more sustainable, or we're trying to make things healthier. So have you seen examples, or can you talk a little bit about how to integrate, or how AI might help integrate some of these other goals we're looking to get out of our food system?
Yeah, constantly. I mean, developing food that is like really liked and enjoyable is already challenging. You know, we've all experienced that. When you cook, when you bake, you play with multiple ingredients, you play with, oven temperature, resting time. So there's so many parameters. It's already something that is very, very challenging. Then if on top of that, you want it to be healthy, you want it to be sustainable, you add other objectives. And so that's a really important goal multiple goals for the industry, but I would say also for consumers themselves. Like, everybody wants food that is enjoyable, but you want also food that is healthy, and at least some of us want it to be sustainable, right? And so it's very difficult on a daily basis to figure this out. We don't have that algorithm. And there's so much choice. You mentioned the number of brands for breakfast cereals. Any product category has so many different choices and options that it's impossible for a normal human being to make a perfect choice, right? And especially if you want to make it enjoyable on the long term. So I think that AI is really a good help. It's already there for sure in the industry a lot, and I would see that in the future, or in the very near future, it would be also accessible for the consumers.
No, I agree. I mean, I think, last 10 years at Madsen, I mean, we never get a project brief where it's just about taste. It's always about multifactorial, especially when you're thinking about creating the future of food, you're always looking to some of these other things that, it's taste, price, convenience, those were always forever baked in, but now it's, like you're saying, it's all these other things. And I think AI is great at helping you solve those multifactorial problems, I think really, really well. And also kind of looking out. I think when we think about AI as not always finding the answer, but having a thought partner. And like I said, personas are great because we all have our own native skill set. I'm a food scientist by training, but I work a lot with marketers and consumer insights professionals, and I have my own gaps, and I can actually look to AI as being a really 24/7 thought partner for me. Even when I'm in the car, it's not always Chef Morgan. I have other AI models that I talk to on my way to work because I'm having a kind of a conscious, continuous stream. When I get back to my desk, there's a transcript waiting for me of that conversation. So sometimes you can just explore new areas that you're not expert in, and you can start to get some new footholds. So again, like some of the areas you mentioned, sustainability, I don't know as much about that as maybe some other topics. So to me, it's like, how do you get smart fast and bring that into your work in whatever way you need to? Because again, it's all those things together.
Yeah, well, I've definitely seen this work in APHIS, and I've interviewed people who are working on these problems. And I think I shared with you before when we met that when you're working on AI ethics, you're always the person coming into the room saying, well, but did we think of this? I will say there were concerns that were raised around how much sharing of our own data we have to do in order to get some of these benefits. I think some of the uses that you're talking about, whether you're using generative AI to imagine new foods, and that may be less relevant to having, say, an app or AI advise you about personal nutrition. But for every time we go to customize it, we have to share a little bit more. We have to give it more data, more background, and it can raise new issues. So, I mean, to the credit of those I've interviewed, I think it is good that they would be aware of this as they're working on the science of it. They're raising these questions early on at the foundational level and saying, is this okay? Can we move forward with this? Will it cause issues? But other concerns were expressed that, once this migrates out of our lab or out of our hands, then what if others are not that conscientious? So I think that's another component. It's not just what are we doing when we're building these technologies or using them. It's how will others be able to use these technologies once they're beyond the bounds that we've set for them.
Well, I appreciate you guys bringing up the consumer perspective because it is a complex marketplace when you are a consumer with multiple goals. And I love the ethics piece, right? Like if I'm really want some pepperoni pizza, but I know it's not good for me, and I ask my AI, what's pepperoni pizza adjacent that's way more healthy? Now my AI knows I love pepperoni pizza, so I'm probably going to get some coupons in the mail. All that stuff happens when you start to share more of yourself. So as convenient as it is, we do have to be thinking about what are the long-term implications of sharing so much information about ourselves. So.
And it can even be genetic data. I want to be clear. I mean, it's like I love pepperoni pizza or I love certain butter chicken recipes, whatever. But also, it can be very highly personal, very detailed. So not to.
Well, and I think that's a good point because again, like we're using AI professionally, and you might say, "Wow, like are you worried about losing track of all this information that could be confidential information to your clients?" And I think it is a good point because if you're just using a free, off-the-shelf ChatGPT account, there's no expectation that the information that you're putting out is not retained and used in training. We're not using that. We're using a paid enterprise account where you have the contractual, kind of limitations, just like everything else in the cloud. If you're paying for it, you would expect people to protect your data, and you do have to think about that. So again, AI is not any one thing, and you were talking about terms of use or service before,
Yes,
and I think you have to understand and think about what you're doing because you can mitigate some of those risks as long as you're being thoughtful about the type of AI you're using, and the protections and the safeguards that can be built in, because you don't have to share it all.
Right.
Like if you want to toggle it off and not have it remember your pepperoni pizza affinity, you can do that.
I've just got to read the fine print and figure out those
right.
settings, which they're always set to share data.
I think that just to add to that, I think there's another kind of risk that pertains to AI is when AI is no longer there. Because if we delegate our decisions to AI or even our knowledge, and then your telephone, your battery die, or for a company, you have people moving out, the people who were interacting with AI, or something like the contract with the provider is changing. How do you build and preserve that knowledge and expertise? And I think there's potentially a risk there. But yeah.
That sounds like a question for Bill Garrity, if he's still here, or Vice Provost of the library. All right, I'm going to open it up for questions from the audience. So just raise your hand, and I'll run the mic to you.
I don't know that part. Sorry.
I'll start with him.
Short question, is AI going to have to go on the label?
So on the food label.
In what way?
This food was prepared with AI.
So like, if something is genetically modified, like in Europe, you would put the label on, like this product was made using AI. Do you see any reason why it would have to be on a label?
I don't know. I mean, to me, I think that might be difficult for me to conceptualize. I mean, just like, would we mandate, hey, did you use Google in looking up any information when you designed the food products today? I mean, again, as an enabling way to get information, I guess you could put anything on the label. Governments could require anything, I guess. To me, is it obvious that that would be a benefit to consumers? I don't know. People want to know kind of lots of things, and what has to be disclosed, I guess, is a question.
And there's also the question, what's the cutoff? What is considered AI and AI-made food? Like many products that are already on the shelves are already made using AI at some level.
Yeah.
But there's a difference between using AI and using ingredients that are literally in the food. Like if the recipe is made using AI, I don't think it affects the food itself or the components of the food. Maybe.
Yeah, it's a good point, because I mean, AI has been around actually a lot longer than we've been talking about. So when you think about even harvesting products from the field, the color sorting that knocks out the bad blemished ones, that technology has been around for years and years and years. So you're already eating food that's been produced with AI, again, depending on how you define it. And that hasn't been labeled. And I don't know if you'd want to know that or not, that the color sorter used AI or not.
I would like to add to that, just that I think that this why I study culture and why I study law and governance, this will become a question that it becomes contentious. There will be people who will want it on the label. There will be lawsuits. There will be people who protest that it shouldn't be on the label. And that is what has happened with a lot of other types of foods. I mean, I'm thinking of GM foods, but also other kinds of, just even this specific language you're allowed to use or not allowed to use of what goes on the label is highly regulated or very closely watched and constantly bringing about various types of conflict. So personally, I think it would be a good idea to be disclosing the uses of the technologies, but this is where I'm saying we should be listening to the public, listening to consumers early on. I say early on, yes, there have definitely been technologies, high-speed computing, things, all sorts of technologies that have been used when we weren't calling it AI, because there were periods of time where that wasn't the fashionable term. It didn't get you funding. And then it became more exciting, and now everyone is using that term again. But we're here. Now we're at a point where we talk about AI all the time. The public is becoming aware of it. And I think that companies, and again, as a person who's worked on companies' websites and as a former marketer and business person, I think that it would be a good idea for companies to really think hard about the kinds of messaging they want to provide for their publics, their consumers. I know each company will make their own choices about that, but it'll be about the trust issue, feeling like you as a consumer know what you're getting with a particular brand, or trust the food system as a whole, that certain risks will be mitigated and taken care of.
Yeah, I can imagine two very different reactions to that "made with AI" exclamation point on the package, where some people would be like, "Yay!" and other people would be like, "No way!" So keep that in mind. Yeah.
Justin, I was curious among the use cases that you have for AI, if you've explored sort of the other end of packaging, sort of underneath that there's the products themselves.
You know, and I'm not a structural packaging expert. Certainly, when we're thinking about a food product, sometimes the product is the package. I mean, they're really interrelated. Often, we're thinking more about how consumers use products and how the packaging has to perform in that case. So I don't know if I'm actually the best one to talk about kind of packaging life cycles and things in that way. I think certainly it could be used to understand those bigger implications, but I don't have the expertise.
I also have a question for Justin. I was wondering, how do you deal with hallucinations in your AI-based platforms? When there's no AI, real intelligence, people usually over-rely on artificial intelligence, so I don't know, how can you deal with it?
Yeah, I guess the term hallucination is an interesting term because sometimes we liken that word to dreaming or creativity, coming up with an unexpected result. And a lot of times what we're pushing for with new ideas is actually kind of unexpected creative results. And so, when I think about a hallucination, like I'm getting a completely wrong or off answer, I use AI a lot. I never really experienced that in my particular work, but perhaps because I'm not converging to an answer often. I'm actually using generative AI to put a whole suite of potential choices out in front of me to then ultimately down select later. And so it depends, I guess, on what you're using it for. If you're looking for it to drive to the one and only right answer, then I think you can get disappointed. But if you're actually using it differently, to be a creative partner, to come up with alternatives, it's kind of like that question of trust. I mean, we talked about, do you trust AI? Well, do you trust all your colleagues at work to be 100% correct on every topic, every moment of the day? Or do you just look to them for a perspective to offer up, and then you verify and understand, and you think about it, and you put in the consideration set? I mean, that's how we're using AI. So again, it depends on maybe how we're using it, that we actually see the creative potential as in the divergence of ideas is a good thing.
I mean, I think that makes sense, that of all of the uses where you would want to, where that would be a benefit, it seems like when you're trying to dream or use it to expand, create your ideas, that seems right. I'm curious though, you had said you use it later on in the process. So do you also use generative AI to narrow and then move things to market? Maybe I misunderstood. I just wanted to make
so
sure
we actually use AI to diverge and to converge. I mean, a lot of times, processes are iterative, and you put lots of alternatives on the table. You ultimately, you need to launch one food product. You don't need to launch 100 or 200.
Right.
So we are using AI tools that we're still developing to try to down select and rank and prioritize. That's actually, I think, in our experience, a lot harder to do in ways. And what I would say is, to the point that was brought up earlier, the base AI is getting better and better and better at this exponential rate. Things that really didn't work 18 months ago are working great today. Things that aren't working today might work in 18 months. And I think you have to keep at it, because we're using our experience and innovation to actually kind of co-invent with AI. What's the right methodology? What's the right prompt? How do we get there? So there's a lot of things that don't work the first time you try it. And that doesn't mean you throw it out and it's never going to work. That just means that you have to get better at prompting, and the base AI has to get better itself, and then ultimately you'll kind of crack that code. So in terms of down selecting, we're still building those tools. And like if we come up with an ideation, come up with 200 ideas, we feel more comfortable about getting down to 20, but maybe not down to 1 or 2. And then we have to apply different other ways of thinking. And again, it's multifactorial scorecard, because it's, what does the consumer want? What can you afford? How is it going to be made? All these things come into that consideration set.
But I think it's important to be aware that hallucinations happen. And perhaps because I have a much more narrow use of generative AI, but for coding, for example, I get hallucinations all the time. And I guess that it depends on, you have to decide what to do with that, like what you just said. That's the most important part.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I have an appropriate way to close. I'm sorry we're out of time already, so but I did want to share, actually, a hallucination I found today. I asked AI to write a haiku about our panel today. And here's its first pass. Circuits hum softly. Data seeds sprout flavors untold. Silicon harvest yields gold. Now, if you're paying attention, there were too many syllables in there. So it took a little real intelligence to say, wait a second, if we're going, should be 575, I believe. That was 587. So I asked it to try again. Circuits hum softly, data yields flavors untold, code grown flavors bloom. That's the haiku for tonight. And I guess what? It's better than the haiku I would have written, so I will give AI some credit there. Well, thank you guys all for the provocative discussion. I mean, this is a huge topic. It's happening right now. We have to be thinking about this in terms of its promise and all the opportunities it can allow us to do with the changes we want to see in the food system, while also thinking very carefully about how we set up the frameworks and guidelines to use this appropriately. And that will actually continue the trust, because we don't want to go so fast, so far that there's some issue that happens and we have to start kind of all over again. So how do we kind of build as well as the technology grows? The problem is the technology is growing so fast and regulation moves really slow. So that's going to be a problem for another discussion. So everyone, please join me in thanking the panelists today. They did a fantastic job. And we'll share the recording of this event in about a week. In the meantime, we do have some upcoming events I want to share. You guys might want to think about looking for these coming around. So in September, we're going to have another Savor event talking about the relationship between wine and health, which is going to be really interesting. It's going to be centered around some current research being done at UC Davis on looking at all of the literature on wine and health and trying to extract some conclusions from all of that. If you want to continue listening to fascinating conversations around food, please check out the Esculent podcast. This is hosted by Elizabeth McQueen, who is here, our photographer for tonight. And their next episode will feature none other than Chef Martin Yan, who we all know and love. And finally, save the date for the Robert Mondavi Institute's premier food and wine event. Our taste event is October 11th, so get that on your calendars. Thank you again for joining us. Really appreciate it. On behalf of the UC Davis Library and the Robert Mondavi Institute, thank you for coming.